So I'm looking down and I can see the green tracers from the AK-47s. So this is a hot LZ. And so as soon as our lead and the platoons that I was with got up to move, we were hit. I just can tell you there was a heck of a firefight that broke out. And you could hear machine guns and AK-47s and it was a huge boom. I had my first guy wounded, then another guy wounded. No sooner did that happen, and I think we got that settled down a bit, then the lower platoon was hit. And then I said, man, we're in deep trouble. And by the way, it's getting dark. So I immediately called in for close air support and some gunship support and medevacs. And I began to be concerned about the weather closing in totally again, the monsoon, us not being able to get out of there because of the weather. I mean, it used to rain for days, no stop. Rain for days, thunder and lightning, wind. First thing I did was have a discussion with my battalion commander via radio. He said, because of the weather, we're socked in all of I Corps. You got to get to the sea on your own. We can't help you.
But you guys are essentially combat ineffective. I'd imagine you're low on food, ammo, air support's not coming.
I said, I think what I need to do is avoid the enemy.
Right.
Can't afford another firefight. No support. We're low on batteries, no food, 100 rounds per man. And the question is, how do I get those guys out of there? And I said, okay, boys, here's our situation. We got to get out of here by ourselves. Nobody's going to help us.
Welcome to the Vantage Point. I'm your host, Taylor Chapman. Ted Severn, thanks for coming on the show, brother. How are you?
I'm good, and it's an honor to be here.
It is. You're a retired colonel out of the Army, fought in Vietnam and well past that era. And I just kind of want to sit down with you today, hear a little bit about what it was like back then. We'll get into some specific missions and just get to know you a little bit in front of this beautiful vehicle.
Okay, good. Sounds good.
But you told me when we walked in, you got about 100,000 miles driving one of these. Tell me about that.
I do. Well, it's a quarter-ton Jeep. Looks like a World War II Jeep in so many ways. It's was made by Ford, AM General, and Kaiser automobile manufacturing companies. 71 horsepower engine, so you're not going to get anywhere real fast. It's four-wheel suspension, independent suspension. Sometimes that was a problem because it was easy to roll if you got in rugged terrain. But it served a lot of great Army guys and Air Force guys and Marines, a couple of Navy guys, I guess, now and then. From about 1959 to 1988, which is when we, in the Army, began to transition to the Humvee. So, super vehicle.
Yeah. And you noticed first thing was the spade on the back, which indicates 101st, a unit you served in.
That's correct.
That's a random, I did not know that before I coordinated this. That's
First
pretty
Battalion, 327th Infantry. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Remarkable. What was your favorite thing about these vehicles back then? This one's probably not in the same condition, but.
You know, I would say their reliability. I mean, they would go anywhere. They would start all the time. They weren't very complicated to fix. Four-cylinder engine. So it was just a tremendously reliable vehicle that would run forever. Yeah.
Well, this one started right up, to my surprise. We started out here in Colorado. It was about 28 degrees and 6:30 in the morning, and he fired it right up. So,
did you drive it here?
No, we didn't drive it here. The brakes don't work. So we trailered
telling me that before.
Yeah, we trailered it here, but she's still running. We drove it around in here. So neat vehicle.
I see the Jeep tracks on the floor.
How funny, but
terrific.
Well, like I said, thanks for coming in. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's an honor to be in your presence. I know a lot of your story, but I'm going to share it here with the audience. And you've been through so much, so it's just, I can feel your aura. It's an honor to be in your presence. So let's just start before the war, before you even thought about going into the service. Where was life taking you around high school age, late teens?
Well, my dad was Air Force, so I grew up in an Air Force family.
Okay.
So my dad flew fighters and transports in World War II, got out of the service after the war like most young men did. And I don't think life was quite exciting enough for him. So coincidentally, when he returned to what used to be the Army Air Forces, that had changed, and there was a whole separate branch of the military service called the Air Force. So he came back in as a P-51 fighter pilot, and then I think he was stationed out of a place called Grenier, New Hampshire, and then went down to MacDill to be in the 1st Jet Squadron. And the Chinese started coming across the border. They needed B-29 pilots, so we ended up in B-29s, 60 missions, combat missions. And then he flew the B-47, B-52. He was B-52 squadron commander in Vietnam. So I was watching this go on, grew up in it, wanted to be a pilot myself. You could see the Vietnam War building, and I wanted to be a hottest fighter pilot in the Air Force. Senior year, my eyes turned south. I went from 2020 to 2040. I could qualify to be a bombardier navigator. I said, I've been raised in a pilot's family. If I can't fly the airplane and be in charge of it, how do I get in the infantry? So in 1966, that was not a problem because the ground war was growing. They needed infantry officers, and that's kind of my background with the family, and that's how I ended up in the Army.
What did you do for fun back then? You know, nowadays, people that age, younger generations, all we have is screens and computer games and digital forms of entertainment. So what did you guys do for fun?
Well, one was sports.
Sure.
You know, I played football, I swam, I played baseball, I ran track, and so I hung around with athletes. I mean, we just had a lot of fun, so that's one. Secondly, you know, I was raised on a military base, so we had a theater, we had a teen club. So eventually I became the president of the teen club. We used to have dances every Saturday night. So it was either you're going to a sporting event or you're hanging out with your buddies at the teen club and you're dancing and having a good time. You know, as we began to get our driver's license, there was a lot of hamburger joints and hot dog joints, and we used to go from one to the other, chasing girls and going to the movie. You know, there was a time, I guess, from the time I was a sophomore to the time I was a senior, we used to meet every Friday night. Friday night was movie night. So one half of the theater was filled with my peers. And we just had a blast doing that.
Yeah, that's fun. So a lot of interaction, a lot of social interaction, a lot of camaraderie.
Yeah, so no screens, no iPhones. We were eyeball to eyeball having a good time.
Faces and eye contact.
Yes.
That's scary stuff nowadays, unfortunately. What would you say to maybe someone younger generation who's maybe struggling with some kind of screen addiction? Like, tell them about the beautiful world before screens.
Well, you know, I would give you an example of, you know, a couple of years ago, I took my grandkids camping, you know, and so we had about 3 Severn families. And they all brought their iPhones. And I said, now, wait a minute. First thing you have to do is put those in a box.
Uh-oh.
And then it was, we're going to play hide and seek, and we're going to go hike. So after about an hour, everybody was free of their screens, and they were having fun interfacing. So I guess as it applies to today, I would say, put your screens away, for crying out loud. You do not need to be on that screen. Interface with somebody. Have fun talking to somebody. Get to know them. Look them in the eyeball. Go to a movie, have a drink, go to a dance, be people-oriented. Get away from the screen, because my observation as an old guy now is that we have, as Americans, have lost a great capability on interaction with people. In Colorado, I mean, gosh, you can't find a better state than Colorado. I mean, whatever you're interested in that doesn't have to do with a sandy beach and an ocean, you can do here.
Yeah.
Fish, hike, camp, ski, shoot, fish. I said that once before, but anyway, there's a lot to do in just enjoy the beautiful scenery that we have every day as we get up.
Nature's beautiful everywhere too, not just in Colorado. I mean, just get out, touch some grass, sniff some air, and just meet somebody.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful part of life.
I agree with that.
Well, let's get into it a little bit. We'll have plenty of nature to talk about in Vietnam. But how'd you end up joining the service as infantry?
That's a good question. In summer of 1966, I became interested in the war. And my great-grandfather fought in the Civil War. My grandfather fought in World War I. My dad covered about 3 wars. So it was kind of a family thing to do, to serve your nation, to keep us free. And so I knew I wanted to serve. If I'd qualified to be a fighter pilot, there was no question I was going to make a career out of it. But I said, okay, I just want to be where the action is, to go help win the war. And I said, since I can't fly, the next piece of action that I would like to be involved in is the infantry. And that was kind of reinforced, I guess, in the summer of '66 when I watched a program, CBS special, and it was called I Am Soldier. And it followed a rifle company with the 1st Cavalry Division for 6 months of operations in Vietnam. The rifle company commander was a West Point graduate, Captain Airborne Ranger by the name of Theodore Danielson, who later in life I met, by the way. And I said, if I can't fly, that's what I'm going to do. So I swam for University of Massachusetts. and had a locker right off the pool. A guy who had a locker about 4 down from me was Colonel Joe Bonack. So Bonack was the PMS professor of military science for the Army at the University of Massachusetts. And he knew I was a pretty good Air Force cadet. And so every time, we'd have a practice in the morning at 0:30, and that would be for distance. Then we'd have repeats in the afternoon, beginning at about 4:30. So I bumped into him about, at least 3 times a week. He'd be changing clothes to go lift weights, and I'd be changing clothes to go work out. And one day he said, and it's the day that I had my flight physical, and the eyes didn't cut it. And so he said, "Hey, Cadet Severn, how's it going?" I said, "It's going good, sir, but I had a major disappointment. I can't fly." So keeping in mind that I just seen this great special, knowing he was the PMS for Army, I said, "So, sir, is it too late senior year? Is it too late to get in an Army ROTC?" And he said, "What are you doing after practice?" And I said, I don't know. I'm going to get something to eat. And he said, "I'm going to wait for you. You come see me after practice." So, we finished practice up about 6 in the evening, and I looked out the door and saw his light still open in the ROTC building. Wandered up there, and he'd kept his admin NCO. Mm-hmm. So I was there for half an hour. And after that half an hour, I was disenrolled from Air Force ROTC, enrolled in Army ROTC, signed to be an Airborne Ranger infantryman. And he said, "You got to learn in a hurry. We've got something called the Base Day Special Forces. You're now the executive officer, so get with it." That's how it happened. And then from then, it was just high adventure.
Yeah. When did the draft come into play after then?
Well, the draft was in full effect by the time I went in the service. And, there was never any thought in my mind that I was going to wait to be drafted. I wanted to be proactive. I knew I wanted to do it. I wanted to get involved. I wanted to lead infantry soldiers in combat because that's kind of the family heritage. And but interestingly enough, if you fast forward, about half the troops that I commanded in Vietnam were draftees. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, the guys that were regular Army and draftees, they melded perfectly because, as you probably discovered in Afghanistan, you're not fighting for God, motherhood, and apple pie. You're fighting for your fellow man, your fellow soldier, your buddy. And so it takes on a whole different meaning when you meld as a coherent group.
Yeah. So there was really no difference between a draftee and someone who volunteered, you wouldn't say?
No, I mean, as far as the status in the unit, no. You are a fellow soldier, you are a brother, and you were there to save each other.
How about like work ethic, discipline?
I got to tell you, when I think back at my good men who I loved, still love them, and I told you the story about the reunion. Maybe we can bring that out at some point in time. But they respected themselves as fellow infantrymen. Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest changes today is that, and after the Vietnam War basically, is that we deploy as units. And I remember as a G3 of the 4th Infantry Division, that was so very important to train as a unit and deploy as a unit and come home as a unit. In Vietnam, we weren't doing that. We were individual replacements. So, I'd get a resupply chopper in every 6 days, and I couldn't tell who was walking off the darn thing. If I lost a couple guys for one reason or the other, the S1 would try to refill me within 2 weeks with however many guys that I lost in combat or sickness or just rotating out. So I think one of the biggest differences is in regular units going over together, having trained together, and then trying to train on the fly because, I think basic training had been reduced to something like 6 or 7 weeks. I think it's 8 weeks today, and then the total with OSIT, if you count advanced individual training, I think we're up to something. I used to command the infantry training brigade, and it was 13 weeks, OSIT was, and now it's, I think, 16 weeks, 17 weeks. And there are some reasons for that. But anyway, so we had minimal training people who would go through a quick AIT. They'd come to the unit not really understanding some of the basic things, like how do you set up a Claymore mine? Mm-hmm. How do you set up a trip flare? They weren't very good at disassembly of more complicated crew-served weapons like the M60. And so we were on combat operations, but we were actually training the new guys while we were on combat operations.
Wow.
And so that's a very quick OJT or you don't cut it. And I think that when we looked at, let's say, the non-commissioned officer corps, because of casualties over the years, basically instead of a sergeant first class as a platoon sergeant, you had a staff sergeant. Mm-hmm. Instead of a staff sergeant as a squad leader, you had a sergeant E5. And the sergeant E5 might have not been in the service even 2 years yet. So everybody had to help everybody learn very quickly in order to conduct the combat operation and live. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah. I was just curious, I think nowadays if people were forced to go fight and do a war, I think it would be a little bit of a different response, but it sounds like there was a lot of pride and, just joy in serving the country back then.
Yeah, I would say generally that's probably true. As you probably watched in looking through your rearview mirror, I mean, we had a lot of protesters during that time. Mm-hmm. And, it really began in 1967 in earnest, 68, 69, 70. I mean, so I became a rifle company commander in really the end of 1969. So there were I had a medic, for example, who was not in favor of the war, refused to carry a rifle.
Really?
And that refusal had taken place before I got there. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have any problem with this. I said, I need you to patch people up. I don't care whether you're carrying a rifle or not.
Yeah.
So I think, once they got together as a group and found out that they were a good team, and I've always been a focus on discipline, mm-hmm. And I think that really works. And people begin to take pride in themselves and pride in what they can do and what they can't do. And I remember, I think one of the most difficult things was during the Nixon administration, he announced we were leaving. And yet we're still on, it used to be search and destroy. Politically, we changed the name and it became reconnaissance in force. But the bottom line is you're sent in there to find the enemy, fix him, and kill him. And if you need to bring in other rifle companies or even battalions to do that, like in Hamburger Hill, mm-hmm. You do that. But there's a good chance that somebody's going to get whacked during that period of time. And so you have to work together as a team in order to prevent as best you can that from happening. And so everybody had a lot of pride in keeping the other guy alive. Yeah. And I'm sure it was the same in Afghanistan.
For sure it was, but we all volunteered. That's why I was just kind of curious about that.
Yeah. Well, no, the draftees were blended very well. Yeah. Wow. And are still, when we have a reunion every 2 years, I mean, they're still very prideful of their service. It's one of the best things best memories they have in the service is serving America after the fact, looking back at it, and being a part of that integral brotherhood mm-hmm. of Delta Company, 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry. Yeah. That's pretty neat phenomena to watch.
When you go through shared struggle like that, like in war, I don't think you can ever find anything greater than that.
There's nothing like it.
No,
I don't think.
Well, you mentioned Delta Company. Like I said, I wanted to highlight an operation that you guys took part in, Operation Bach Ma in Vietnam. But let's talk about the train up with Delta Company prior to that deployment. How are you guys getting ready to move into country?
So the 1st Brigade, the Delta was my battalion, 1st Battalion, 327th, and Delta Company, of course, entered the fight in 1966. 1st Brigade, 101st, was the first to go. So they'd been there for 4 years before I joined them, 3.5 anyway. So we'd had a bunch of replacements since that time, so they weren't working well as a unit. And so I'll tell you how I came to the unit. So I went through infantry officer basic, which had been reduced down to 5 weeks to get lieutenants into combat. That's how short.
5 weeks.
5 weeks. I mean, I learned in infantry officer basic that the average lifespan of a lieutenant in combat was 3 months when I entered the Army in 1967. And so very quickly went through a vastly reduced IOBC, probably 2/3 reduced. And then immediately we graduated from infantry officer basic, went right to ranger training, those of us who are going to ranger school. So we said, got our diplomas on stage, and then they reported into ranger school. And so that was November 15th, 1967. And of course, it's 8 weeks. So we graduated at the end of January. And when you looked at the class, I think we started with a little over 200. And we ended up with graduating 94. So pretty good attrition rate. Mm-hmm. Tough school.
Yep.
I think it still is today. And I think that's a good thing. But half the class went to the 82nd Airborne Division or the 101st Airborne Division. And the idea then was you that gives you for 3 months. So you're with troops for 3 months, then right to Vietnam. The other half, and the half that I went with, so about 40 guys, roughly 45, we were assigned to Europe, to the European theater. So my assignment was with the 2nd Battalion, 15th Infantry in Wildflecken, Germany. I'm sure many of our watchers may have served in Wildflecken at that time. That's the way the Germans call it, instead of Wildflecken, Wildflecken. And so we had one infantry battalion there. We had an corps engineer construction battalion, vertical construction battalion. We had a Hawk missile battery stationed there in the battalion headquarters, and that was it. So this was right up on the east-west German border, south of Fulda. And so we had a section of the border that we were responsible for. It was a mechanized unit. It was part of the 3rd Infantry Division. And thank goodness for that, because after having gone through 6 weeks of summer training after I should have graduated from college, a quick IOBC, Ranger training in that assignment, I think, prepared me about as good as an officer could be prepared for combat. So I walked in there as a second lieutenant, took over a rifle company, 4 tracked vehicles. We were supposed to have 44 men. I think I had 27 men because the focus was on Vietnam. So you're trying to fill USAREUR, U.S. Army Europe, as best you could while still really focusing first on filling the Vietnam units, and even they were short. And so I had the opportunity to be a platoon leader for 6 months, and then and by the way, back in those days, because of casualties, you were a second lieutenant for a year, and then at the year mark, if you didn't really screw it up, you were a first lieutenant for a year, and then you were a captain. So
quick turnaround.
Oh man, it was really quick. So fortunately, I got to be a platoon leader, and then because I was a phys ed major and played baseball, and so they assigned me to be the baseball coach for the post. We had inter-post sports at that point in time, so I was trying to be a platoon leader and the baseball coach. And then it got to be August of 1968 by that time, and somebody saw some leadership in me and said, okay, we need a Charlie Company commander. You're now the Charlie Company commander as a second lieutenant.
Wow.
So you got 160 men. You've got something like 18 tracked vehicles and a bunch of trucks and that kind of thing. And so you learned in a hurry. And then not even a week after I'd taken command, the Soviets decided to invade Czechoslovakia. So that was, I think, on August 22nd, as I look back, 1968. So, boy, we went out the back gate, picked up our ammo trailers, got into our assembly area, and the battalion commander said, okay, boys, lock and load, unpack the mortars, get them ready to shoot. And I had a weapons platoon in Charlie Company at that point in time, so we had 3 105 Jeeps, this with a 105 on it.
Man, I can't imagine.
I had 3 81 millimeter mortars. We had them all lined up, ready to go, and I reconned. And back in those days, I didn't have an XO, so here I was the second lieutenant for a couple more weeks before I became first lieutenant. And I had a sergeant first class as my acting first sergeant, great guy, combat veteran from the 1st Cavalry Division. And then I had 4 staff sergeants as platoon sergeants / platoon leaders.
Wow.
And they were just super NCOs who really had their head in the game, knew the seriousness of what we were asked to do. And I just remember doing a leader's recon and we didn't have a dedicated, we'd really not studied the GDP, General Defense Plan, as we did later when I was a battalion commander. But boy, I'll tell you, I remember going up with my quarter ton and my driver, Smith. And I said, Smith, hide in the wood line, keep the radios on. I'm going to run the our GDP line, and then I'm going to call the platoon sergeants up here, platoon leaders, and then we'll figure out where we're going to put every weapon system. So that's what we did. And we were in that configuration for about, 4 days, I guess, before the powers that be, to include the President of the United States, decided, the Soviets are attacking Czechoslovakia because they want to break away from the Soviet bloc. And so we stood down, watched everything, got it ready to go the next time. So those kinds of, and then I had the opportunity to be a company commander for 9 months. So we made multiple tours to the border and training areas within Germany, and got very proficient in gunnery and tactics, techniques, and procedures. And So I'm glad I had that time
Yeah.
before overcome, but it's totally different than the way it is now.
Right. A lot of experience leading up to it then.
Yeah.
If all you had was that 5-week officer course, can you imagine deploying into what you ended up deploying into?
I got to tell you, I think in retrospect, you know, I think the NCO Corps and the officer corps are no different. I mean, you've got really good guys that have a good feel for tactics and people and what you need to know in order to be able to go to war and come out alive.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have people who aren't acclimated that way or oriented that way. And I think we probably lost a lot of good young lieutenants and sergeants because they hadn't had enough training before they went to war.
Yeah. I mean, with the war growing as it was at the time, I'd imagine, you know, cutting training time was necessary because you had so many casualties. You had to get soldiers in the fight, but you know, you were sacrificing some of that experience, some of that training. Yeah.
And I'd like to get back to that. But first, to come back to your first point. So I go to Vietnam. I'm an S4 for 3.5 months. And then we had a company commander in Delta Company who was a Cobra pilot. And back in those days, we did not have an aviation branch. So a commissioned officer, for example, would go to flight school. He might be an infantry officer, but he's had flight training, not infantry training.
Mm-hmm.
And this was one of those cases. So here we had a guy who was an infantry officer, but he was a Cobra pilot, never had done anything on the ground. And so he did not know tactics, techniques, and procedures. And so things were a little shoddy, and he got some people killed, and he was relieved. And I was out trying to get my afternoon exercise as an S4 along the berm, and battalion commander comes up in his quarter ton, says, "Severn, you're now the Delta Company commander. Load up your rucksack. There's a helicopter down at the pad. They're going to fly you right into an LZ, Delta Company LZ in the mountains. You're in charge."
Mm-hmm. Where was Delta Company located at that
They
time?
were, on the coastline. The Quang Cree is right up on the border. The next big town, city down, probably 90 miles from that, south, is the imperial city of Hue. You may have read about it at some point in time. So Camp Eagle was southwest of Hue by a couple miles.
Mm-hmm.
Hue Phubai. Phubai was the next smaller town. And we were occupying at that time a fire support base called Roy. And the way we operated back in the Vietnam days was that you conducted infantry operations not many times out of reach of supporting indirect fire. And so we had this fire base called Roy, and it was really a peninsula out into a huge bay that fed into the South China Sea. And then I think for the story that we're going to lead up to, I think it's important that the viewers understand the terrain. So I Corps was the most northern corps in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most heavily occupied by enemy soldiers, and I'm talking about the North Vietnamese regulars of any of the corps. And I think you've probably heard of the Ho Chi Minh. Well, it was really multiple trails that broke off from a main north-south trail line all the way from North Vietnam up near Hanoi. So there were a lot of bad guys in our area. And it was very mountainous. So you had this main mountain. So you had the lowlands, which is right along the coast. And then that went back for anywhere from a quarter of a mile to several miles. And then you hit this main ridge line of mountains that would suddenly go up to 4,000 and 5,000 feet. Heavily jungled, a lot of rice paddies in the lowlands. And so my mission was to take command of Delta Company in the mountains, move them down and occupy fire support base Roy for a week or two, get the company operational again, and then be prepared to go on combat operations. So our mission for a while was to secure Roy, and then we moved off of Roy and ambushed the lowlands, because what would happen, particularly in monsoons are another part of this. So about October of every year, you would get into the monsoon season,
mm-hmm.
and that just means heavy rains. I mean, it used to rain for days,
mm-hmm.
no stop, rain for days, thunder and lightning, wind.
And not just a drizzle, I'm talking
about a downpour for days. And so the temperature, and you get a November, December, January timeframe, drops in the mountains down to the 50s. It's even touched down into the 30s.
Man.
You're in jungle fatigues. It's raining 24 hours a day. You may have a rain jacket, but I'm telling you, you're going to get absolutely soaking wet. Most soldiers spent all day shivering. You know, I mean, because your skin gets cold, wet, white, and clammy. It just, it's a miserable, miserable condition. And we operated 101st Airborne Division. I think was probably very unique. Based on my conversations with a lot of other guys in different divisions there. We operated 30, 60, 90 days in the field at a time. Mm-hmm. So you're living out of your rucksack. You got you've got jungle fatigues on. And I got to tell you, after about a month, they kind of rot off. You're eating sea rations. So our resupply operation was, let's say, a combat assault into an area. So probably about 3 days after you make your combat assault, you may get a kick out. So I'd call in, and that means you've got to resupply Hueys, not Blackhawks back in those days, would hover above whatever your location was in the jungle if you're in the mountains, and they'd literally kick out sea rations and ammunition and batteries to you. So you'd rustle around on the ground with that, get it all distributed, and then 3 days later you would do a what we call a heavy resupply. Mm-hmm. So that you'd either find a one-ship LZ landing zone, or you'd cut one, mm-hmm. get a helicopter in, and they would bring in mail, which was very important to us. And if you needed a replacement or needed to get somebody out, they would go out on that helicopter. Maybe get a chaplain in, maybe not. Mm-hmm. But we didn't have a chaplain who consistently traveled with us. That's a whole different story that I could talk about. But anyway, that's the way we operated.
Yeah. So describe Camp Eagle a little bit. What were conditions like on Camp Eagle?
Well, Camp Eagle was where the whole division rear was located. And so every brigade had a headquarters there, and of course, barracks and/or GP medium tents to support the brigade headquarters. And then, of course, their subordinate battalion headquarters were there. So, they kind of built sea huts. So they were plywood sea huts off the ground because of the monsoon season. And I will say that most of Camp Eagle was built on an old Vietnamese cemetery. And of course, they buried their dead on top of the ground and then would build a mound over that. So our camp was full of these. It was built on a cemetery, actually.
Interesting.
Lots of rats as a result of that. But these sea huts were probably 60 feet long. We're off the ground maybe 2 or 3 feet, stairs leading up to them. And about one sheet of plywood would be the base, and then you'd have a screen, and then you'd have a roof. And they were probably, I'm guessing, maybe 25 feet wide, main door. And then if it was a staff building, staff sections, if you will, if it was a barracks, you'd either have an open barracks bay or in the BOQ, for example, when I first lived there, you had about 3 cubicles, which were your room in essence, in which you had a cot with a mosquito netting over it and a field desk. And so that's the way we lived. And then you sandbagged it all the way up, halfway up to the base of the plywood, that one sheet of plywood. We had a dining facility for the rear area. We were particularly down by a creek, so that added, I guess, to a little bit felt a little bit like home anyway. Yeah, right. You got a nice little creek running through your area. Then you have every battalion had a chopper pad because you operated logistically out of there. So as an S4, for example, I would have a Huey assigned to me every day from sunup until sundown. And that's the way I would supply the fire base, or the guys that we had supporting the fire base. That's the way I would supply each rifle company in the field with that single Huey. And those guys would fly long days, 15-hour days was not uncommon. There were no restrictions on crew rest at that point in time. You did what you needed to do.
Yeah. So that was home when you weren't in the field, which probably felt like luxury after spending weeks out.
You had, wasn't very luxurious.
Right.
And so by the way, so in each company, Delta Company, for example, we kind of had a sea hut as the main company headquarters, but then behind it, so that was the beginning of Battalion Row, if you will. And then behind it, you had 3 GP mediums with cots in them. And then the shower was basically a boat that we probably procured from the Marine Corps up on a stand, and it would catch rainwater. And then a couple of our guys rigged a hose to it and some kind of a shower attachment, and you pulled a chain in order to get shower out of there. But it was whatever temperature the water was, that's what you got. No hot and cold water.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
It was just wet. Yeah.
Innovative.
Yeah. And then we had, of course, you always got to think about latrines. So we had probably a bunch of 4-holers throughout the camp. You had about maybe 18 inches of a 50-gallon drum down there with engine oil in it. Mm-hmm. And so you do your business, and then you have to go burn the drum off the next day. And we also had what we used to call piss tubes, you know, and they're all over the compound. And our brigade commander used to hang a sign on it, shoot low, you know, because as you probably know, I mean, the tendency when you get into a firefight is you shoot a little high. Right. So he wanted to remind everybody, hey, just calm down and shoot low, you know, so you hit your target off.
Man, that's funny. Yeah, if you were to see Afghanistan during the height of that war, some of those bases were large cities.
Were they?
Yeah. I mean, buildings, multi-story buildings, latrines, running water, showers, hot, cold water, whatever you wanted. Kind of embarrassing to talk about after hearing your story.
Well, you know, my son-in-law, I've got family members who have served and are still serving, but my son-in-law was a security guy for the Air Force, and he secured Bagram for 2 different times, 2 years at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, spent a lot of time there. That place was absolutely massive.
Yeah, so what he said.
Yeah. Well, let's get into starting to train for Operation Bach Ma. The operation was to find and locate hospital systems, NVA hospital systems and command posts within the Bach Ma area. So how long from receiving this mission did you guys have to plan up for it?
Okay, well, let's go back to first what I told you what we're doing in the lowlands. So I described the terrain. So this was, we were into monsoon season in January. We were in the middle of it. And so our mission then was to ambush food parties carrying water buffalo, rice, that kind of thing, up to the North Vietnamese army in the mountains. So we were trying to deprive them of food as a way of weakening that enemy. And so we would have ambushes all over a city. For example, one of the little cities we ambushed was a little town called Phu Loc, fishing village, right on this bay that I was describing to you. And so it was not uncommon for us to go out and ambush and try to kill the ambushers. And so we knew that there were North Vietnamese Army members, at least 1 or 2 with each carrying party. There were some VC but then there were local villagers who had been at gunpoint, forced to carry these, these rations, if you will, up to the North Vietnamese. So, after the ambush, you don't know who is the real enemy or not.
Right.
So when you talk about long-term challenges that you might have as a soldier, having done that, that's one of the issues. I think that probably hasn't changed from war to war. But
tough.
Anyway, so that's what we were in the middle of doing. And I remember at the time the Bach Ma operation was assigned to me, I was chopped to the 2nd Battalion, 327th Infantry. So the 1st Battalion, my battalion, was normally in the mountains. This battalion was securing the road. And there was one main road called QL1, and it ran all the way from Hanoi down to Saigon and beyond. And it ran along the coastline, basically. So, so you're on an ambush mission, and then you got this mission to make a combat assault. And I would say, first of all, in the education process, so the 101st Airborne Division was the 2nd Air Mobile Division. We called it Air Mobile then instead of Air Assault. 1st Cavalry Division being the first one. So 101st began transitioning from being paratrooper outfit to a air assault outfit, probably about 1967, 68, 69, when they acquired all the helicopters. So when I got there, it was an air mobile division. So our modus operandi was to make a combat assault into an area, try to find the enemy, kill him, and then we make a combat assault to another area. So you were continually making combat assaults. I think Most of my guys have probably over 50 combat assaults or extractions. We were doing that all the time. So there was no training that went on once I received that mission. We just got ready to make a combat assault.
Wow.
So I took over the rifle company in the mountains, moved it to Firebase Roy, and then after several weeks on Roy, we had the ambush mission. So even though I had made a combat assault in training, I'd never made a live combat assault. So this was my first real combat assault as a company commander. It took 22 helicopters, 22 Hueys to carry my rifle company at 5 men, aircraft load, ACL is what we used to call it. And then you would normally be accompanied by 2 Cobra gunships. It would be Apaches today. And so you load it up and off you went. 22 ships in the air, 24 counting the Cobras. And you'd land in an LZ that if I tried to have at least an aerial recon of that LZ. So as a company commander, I knew what the terrain looked like other than reading a map. And by the way, no GPSs during that time. We were operating off of 1/50 or 1/25,000 maps, terrain contour maps, and most of the combat assaults were conducted the same way. You involved all the helicopter assets, so you've got to have the gunships, the lift ships, the medevacs, all in the same station. So you either have the battalion commander of the 3 or the battalion commander and the 3 coordinating the combat assault, and they're on the radio with everybody. Mm-hmm. And then talking about everybody, I'm talking about forward air control, tactical, for attack air support, all the helicopters to include additional gunships, all the artillery pieces. And the idea is once you're in the air and you're about 5 minutes out, then you've got at least a battery firing indirect fire support to try to clear the LZ. So you're either trying to detonate any mines that may have been set in that LZ, or you're trying to scare bad guys away or kill them, ideally, before you get there, so that they're running in all kinds of different directions when your first ship's set down. Then in the orchestration of it all, I remember I talked to a lot of good friends of mine that had been company commanders for a while. And we kind of felt that the best position for a company commander was probably in the 5th helicopter. So you'd have the 1st platoon, whatever numbered platoon that was, that would land with 4 helicopters. And so you get the platoon leader in there, his radio telephone operator, enough machine guns, and at that time it was the M60 machine gun, not the what we're using today. Mm-hmm. And we had M79 instead of 203s. We had M79s,
grenade
40
launcher.
millimeter grenade launcher. So I tried to get as much of those guys on the ground as I could in that first platoon that set down within the first 4 helicopters. And then then I would ride in the 5th helicopter. So as they were landing, and by the way, in I Corps, it wasn't like it was, let's say, in some of the other corps. And I think what most people have seen redepicted is I Am a Soldier, where they had this huge landing zone. We were lucky to get a 1-ship LZ. And that would be a natural LZ. So you were coming in 1 ship right after the other, and that's not necessarily the most efficient way to do it or the safest way to do it, because you could have very few guys on the ground and get hit very heavily. So that I'd come in on the 5th ship with an ACL of 5, I would carry myself, and I had 2 radio telephone operators, one on platoon push, or a company push, one on battalion push. Then I'd carry my forward observer with me. This guy's name was Dave Rudlinski, a great guy from California, and his radio telephone operator. So then once I got on the ground, we had the ability to call in any additional support that we needed. And then we just continue to pile on, whether it was a hot LZ or not. So that's the way to describe a combat assault. And ideally, when you get 1 platoon on, you kind of spread out your perimeter. And when you get 2 platoons on the ground, then you can begin the attack, based on what's happening on the ground, and get off the LZ as soon as you can.
Mm-hmm. So you guys are landing 1 bird at a time, depending on how large the LZ was, on a bunch of blast holes, essentially, from ordnance coming in from the artillery guys. Correct. First. How did that feel? Because I know what it's like to be in a blast hole. I had to feel kind of raw coming in like that.
Well, it was kind of a standard modus operandi at that time, so it was accepted. I would say that in the mountains there's a lot of rock, and so if depending on what kind of at that time artillery fire was 105s, 155s, 8 inches, 175ers. So you never knew what you had supporting you in the field, and it seemed like every fire support base, the way they reconfigured the artillery. I remember one fire base called Bastogne where I had a little bit of everything, and I secured that fire base for about 2 weeks. So we had 8-inch guns, 175s, 155s, and 105s, and most of them were not self-propelled; they were towed.
Mm-hmm.
But another fire base might have just 105s and 155s, or one or the other. I think we were receiving fire out of Firebase Roy, and to the best of my recollection, they were a combination of a battery of 105s and half a battery of 155s. And they don't deliver a very big hole.
Right.
And if you got rock down there, so you may have a hole of 4 to 6 inches, and then a pretty good blast, but it's not big enough to slow you down on a landing zone.
I imagine you could smell that. You could feel
all you smell you smell the cordite. If there happened to be some enemy there, you could smell that too.
Really?
Fresh blood, kind of a bronzish smell, if you will.
Yeah.
So that answer that question?
Absolutely. So this kind of describes a typical combat assault, an orchestra of combat assets. You're prepping the target with artillery. You have gunship escorts. How did this mission, the Operation Bach Ma, differ from a regular combat assault? Okay, well, let me talk about that. So first of all, I'm in the 5th helicopter up, so I'm looking down and I can see the green tracers from the AK-47s. So this is a hot LZ. Green meant enemy tracers? Enemy tracers, okay. Yeah, as opposed to our orange ones. That's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. So I'm in the helicopter, and I say, I'm talking to my radio telephone, or my FO behind me, and I'm saying, hey, Ski, we got a hot LZ. Be prepared to, we did a prep. So, you had pre-planned targets. So I said, be prepared to shift from target can or whatever, slits. Right. And so Ski hit the ground, and, we hit the deck so you wouldn't get whacked. And Ski is adjusting artillery right away. And then, we've got the initial platoon and the second platoon shifting to orient on the enemy fire so that you can lay down a clear base of fire. And then based on the reaction to that, me as the company commander determine, okay, what's our next action? Are we going to hold tight? Are we going to maneuver? We're going to lay down a base of fire and then maneuver in the enemy. In this particular case, the Bach Ma operation, it didn't take long to break these guys up. I think they were on the run from the artillery barrage, the prep barrage that we had called in on that LZ. So they began running in a hurry. But they also knew, my intelligence told me that in addition to this area headquarters, a Corps headquarters, we were supposed to destroy that plus an underground hospital. And that was not uncommon for the enemy to do, was to dig underground command posts and hospitals. But I knew we had at least a corps out there. A regiment out there, not a corps. But they said there might be some more regiments out there, Ted. And so you've got about 3,000 soldiers in a regiment, enemy soldiers. And although I was supposed to have somewhere around 140 to 150 men, I normally had 100 to 120. So we're going in there already outgunned and outmanned. And what I discovered in research later was that it was not uncommon for any U.S. battalion operating in that area, whether it's a Marine or it was the 101st, to be outmanned anywhere from 10 to 5 to 1 on any given day. Wow. And then the idea is you make contact and then you surge other units in there to kind of equalize the numbers on the ground. And of course, with our technology and our assets, you could bring those to bear, and that gave you a distinct advantage if you knew how to use them properly. Mm-hmm. So anyway, in this case, we took the initial fire. The enemy began to run.
And then we looked all around the area that we had been told that that this CP and this underground hospital was supposed to be in location. Couldn't find it. And meanwhile, the weather, we made the combat assault in a break in the monsoon weather. So we had a couple of semi-cloudy days, but after about 5 days on the ground, it had begun to squall heavily again. So you'd have a squall, and then it would be clear for a while, and then you'd get another squall. And I began to be concerned about the weather closing in totally into monsoon, to a full monsoon season, and us not being able to get out of there because of the weather. And now we're about 20 kilometers from QL1 and the coast, with a significant mountain range between us and the coast, and we're in the middle of it. And so I'm beginning to think this is not good. We're not finding this thing, and I'm starting to get pressure from my tactical operations center. Hey, Severn, what's taking you so long to find this thing?
And this is a couple of days before you start getting that pressure, right? You're out there?
Yeah, probably about 6 days.
6 days.
So we've gone in with a full resupply of ammo and everything, food, claymore mines. And I had a new, I think I gave you this story to read, but
yeah.
I had a new platoon sergeant by the name of Severn, just a great guy, former 25th Infantry Division soldier. And he was with a not a very aggressive platoon leader, which may not be bad, but this guy just seemed to be not very experienced, not very much common sense about him. And so Severn, in my mind, was very important. And he came in on a resupply just before we made the combat assault. So my first sergeant and I was 24 years old. My first sergeant was 40, and I was a brand new captain at the time. And so we decided together that we needed to place Severn in the first platoon. And anyway, so I said, Severn, why don't you stay down here, you and Lieutenant Kreitz, and you guys can, I gave him a couple of suggestions for cloverleaf operations to try to find this location in their area. But I said, we got to be able to get out of here in a hurry in case the weather closes in. So if that happens, if the monsoon seasons, Lieutenant Kreitz, you and Severn and the platoon secure the LZ, because I'm going to take them up toward Bach Ma, the other two platoons, and you guys secure the LZ, and we'll beat feet down there as soon as we can. So I took the other platoons. We went down a steep ravine, crossed a very rapidly moving creek to river. I think at the most it was probably about up stomach level, really moving quickly. And then we started to move up from west to east, this mountain mass called Bach Ma. And we'd moved really a good day, hard work. I mean, you could see we'd run across trail networks that were heavily traveled. So and you could, in the wet, you could see these, the Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese made sandals out of tires. And so they were tire tracks in the mud. And so there was a lot of traffic that had passed there. And I wanted to keep them off the trails and on ridge lines or on contours of the hills, because I didn't want to get ambushed. And so we moved cautiously with scouts out. Got to be probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 1600. And I said, okay, I found a place on the map where I wanted to put up NDP. And so we would just, and in order to avoid the enemy, I didn't want him to know we were moving at night. So I'd either pick a place that we'd already gone past in the daytime. I'd leave a couple of scouts back there to move back to it, and they would be able to tell me whether it's still secure or not. Or I'd move a couple of scouts ahead to find a NDP location. In this case, because of the weather, I didn't do that. So I stopped everybody for evening C rations, and you stop right in place. So you got 2 guys looking left, 2 guys looking right. The guys in the front are looking forward, the guys in the back oriented forward. 1 man eats at a time while the other is watching. And then I knew it would probably take about where I decided to go with those 2 platoons. It would take probably about half an hour, 45 minutes to get there and get set up. So at about 5 o'clock, 5:15, somewhere around in there, I was having Severn down at the other area, separate platoon, do the same thing. I said, okay, boys, it's time to move into the NDP. Let's do it.
An NDP, night defense posture?
Position.
Position, yep.
Yep. That's where you would set up a 360-degree perimeter.
So you would stay in one location until last light in case they were watching you, and then once it got dark, you would then move 200-300 meters to kind of throw them off.
That's
they wouldn't
correct.
know exactly where you were.
Yep.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And so as soon as our lead and the platoons that I was with got up to move, we were hit. And so I just can tell you there was a heck of a firefight that broke out. And
how did it start?
So it happened with us first.
Right.
So we were moving and had my first guy wounded, then another guy wounded. And there was a fellow by the name of John Hennessy who was what we used to call a shake and bake. You would go through NCO school, start a private, you end up as a staff sergeant.
Right.
He was a carpet layer from New York, just a great guy, good common sense in the field. And so Hennessy started moving his guys around, didn't have a platoon leader. And I started with Redlinsky calling in artillery fire. I very quickly moved forward to see the wounded guys. They weren't, in my opinion, they weren't in a life-threatening situation, and the good medics got them well under control, bleeding stopped, shock treated, that kind of thing. And then no sooner did that happen, and I think we got that settled down a bit, then the lower platoon was hit. Mm-hmm. And Sarah Nittman just did an outstanding job. I had my first man killed when they were hit. I had two more wounded to include the platoon leader, who I believe lost his arm out of that. And then I said, "Man, we're in deep trouble." And by the way, it's getting dark.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it dark at this point, or it's close?
It's close to dark.
Yeah.
We probably had about maybe 20, 25 minutes of daylight left. So I immediately called in for close air support and some gunship support and medevacs. And my good RTO, as I described, said, "Hey, sir, you want me to call in a medevac?" And I said, "Yeah, let's get it here as quickly as I can, if we can," knowing that it was about 60 minutes from Camp Eagle south to where we were. And I would have time to figure out what the situation was at that point in time as a company commander.
And would birds fly in the dark at this time, or no?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah,
Okay.
they would. I mean, it was not the preferred solution, but
Right.
yeah, I could tell you a separate story about great medevac pilots who flew at night to save men.
Okay.
So it was daylight still when they flew down, but yeah, they left in the dark.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I think we're in better shape than Sarah Nittman is. Priority of fires go to the first platoon. And so Dave Redlinsky and I worked out where we'd have assets fire in support of the first platoon. So we were on direct gun target line from the fire base. So I said, okay, let's bring the artillery on Sarah Nittman's from about 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, I think I said. That's the artillery gun target line. We know where the artillery's coming in. That means we can bring the jets in on the, let's say, from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock position. And then we can bring the gunships in below that. And so short time thereafter, after I had requested close air support, we got our first forward observer in, which was an O2 Skymaster. Mm-hmm. And the Skymasters were one step up from the O1 Bird Dog. And instead of offensive rockets on them, they had white phosphorus rockets on them. They called them Willie Pete's. Mm-hmm. And so he would come and orbit overhead about 500 feet to 1,000 feet to maybe 5,000 feet. And I was able to talk directly to him. And so I laid out the battlefield on the ground where I was and where Sarah Nittman was. And I said, let's have priority of fire on Sarah Nittman. And then normally we marked our flanks with smoke in our forwardmost position. Meanwhile, the Air Force pilot is organizing F-4s probably out of Da Nang. That was the closest base. Mm-hmm. And the F-4s, for those who don't know, is a two-place fighter jet we were using back in those days, great airplane. And carried a combination of ordnance in those days. So we had napalm first, then high explosive, either 250, 500-pound dumb bombs, not smart bombs. And then they had a 20-millimeter cannon on them, 2,000 rounds per minute to 4,000 rounds per minute. And so normally the sequence was napalm first, and you're flying in perpendicular or parallel to the company on the ground. So it'd normally be napalm first, a couple canisters, and then you'd roll in with high explosives until you ran out of bombs, and then you'd drill them with 20 millimeter cannon was your last run. So we did that, and with Severn and stopped the attack on Severn. And we kept artillery fire going up on the higher location. And then it just turned black. We got medevac birds in to take care of our wounded and get our KIA out of that location. And then it just, skies opened up on us. And it was just miserable.
Yeah.
Got cold, full monsoon rain, thunder and lightning. And so that's the way it was all night. And I huddled up with the Radlinsky underneath Poncho and with our red fast flashlight filters. I think you guys probably progressed a little bit.
There's a couple in this Jeep.
Yeah. And I picked every crack and cranny on the map that was an escape route for the enemy, and we just drilled it with artillery, probably until about, I don't know, 2 or 3 in the morning.
Wow.
And I said, Dave, I think we got it. Let's just cool it, put the word out to everybody, both locations. The enemy seemed to not be attacking at this point in time, so I said, we need to get some sleep because we got another long day tomorrow. And so I said 50% alert unless the enemy attacks, then obviously everybody's alive and well. And then I said that we need to get recon patrols out the next morning just to find out where they are and see what we can see.
If I could back you up just 1 second.
Yeah.
So for about 8 hours, well into the dark, you guys were just getting hammered by the enemy, artillery falling all around you, air support.
Yep.
You're the conductor of this orchestra of military assets. What did it feel like when all of that subsided? When, it was dark, there was no more gunfire, there was no more bombs going off, and you were just left to what you guys were sitting in, which was probably a bunch of mud and brass. But what did that feel like once everything got quiet?
Well, we were in the mountains, in the jungle. I'm not sure that that's a good question. I think that, I don't know what your experience was in Afghanistan, but, when you're out in our situation in Vietnam at the time, the enemy was all around you. You never got a break.
Right.
You were always fully alert. And so that even though the fighting had stopped for now, they could conduct a night attack. They might conduct a dawn attack. If you picked up and moved from that location, they could be lying in wait for you somewhere. So you really never had a chance to let your hair down.
Yeah.
And so for me personally as a rifle company commander, so it's just pouring down rain. The temperature's probably, 55, 50, 60, somewhere around in there. You're freezing, you're cold, you're tired. In my case, I knew I'd lost my first man and knew I had at least 4 other men wounded. So you're just sitting there. I'm thinking about the families that are going to be notified. I'm thinking about, as a commander, I always, after every contact situation, said, what did you do right, Severn? And what could you have done better to have prevented that death or that wounding or whatever? So I was always thinking, how do I do this better the next time? I think everybody, individual soldier, was just trying to figure out, how do I get through this night?
Yeah.
And we trust our company commander to get us out of this mess, And so that was going through my mind, and I was going through the alternatives. When could they hit? What might they hit? What size organization is this really? And later, by the way, we found out there were 3 regiments out there, not
Wow.
1 regiment. So there was, we were the enemy element that we had contact with was in easy reinforcing distance from another enemy company, 2 companies, 3 companies, battalion, whatever it was.
Mm-hmm. I know that evening you described a Bible verse that came to mind, Matthew 6:3-4, which goes, "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." And I know you had a lot of Bible verses, and faith was very persistent throughout your time in Vietnam. But maybe describe one of those and why it was so helpful for you to kind of work through these dilemmas.
Yeah, well, I think faith plays a big
sure.
part of it. At least it did in my life. And faith has been a work in progress. But I believed in the Lord, and I believed in Christ. And I remember, so in the old Ranger Handbook, I'm not sure whether today's Ranger Handbooks are printed the same way, but there was a page in there for faith, and it was the 23rd Psalm, and it was a Protestant prayer and a Catholic prayer in addition to that. So I remember when I arrived in Vietnam, I ripped that page out of the Ranger Handbook and put it in my wallet.
Yeah.
And I put it in a piece of plastic so it would stay relatively dry. And so, when you're in a battle, you're busy. And time passes sometimes very long, but sometimes very quickly. And I think for a commander, it passes quickly because you're thinking all the time. What are the audibles? It's, it's like playing baseball and you're shortstop or third baseman or catcher, and you're trying to figure out what's next.
Yeah.
Although the stakes are a little higher in this kind of an operation. But anyway, so I think I just knew I needed to get some sleep and to just cool down and stay calm. I pulled out the 23rd, put my poncho over my head, still raining like crazy, pulled out the 23rd Psalm, got out my red flashlight filter and read it. And I think I fell asleep before I finished it.
Yeah.
And I thought about those other, I've thought about the Bach Ma operation forever. And I think I looked those other verses up after the fact.
Right.
But somebody told me that, you just get through the day, the good Lord will give you enough strength and wisdom to get through this day, and you tackle the next day when it comes.
Right.
So I tried to find that verse, and I eventually found it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ones. And if I could just recite the 23rd Psalm real quick.
Sure.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And I feel like this just describes your guys' situation through and through. I see why it meant a lot to you in this moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I carried that with me all through the Vietnam, and then carried it for another 40 years. And I remember pulling it out many times in a jam situation and reading that. It just brought comfort to me as a commander. It's kind of funny when you talk about calm. I think the best leaders, and Theodore Danielson was that way in this program that I watched in 1966. He was calm, he was cool, he was collected, he did not get rattled. And I said as a college student, that's the guy I want to model after. Mm-hmm. And so years later, when we had our first reunion with Delta Company, to a man, the guys came up to me and said, "Sir, we were watching you like a hawk." And I knew that. And you know that. You watch your commander. And they said, "We knew it was going to be okay if you were calm, and you were always calm."
Yeah.
What I told them was, I knew you guys were watching me. I wasn't always calm on the inside, but I knew I had to be calm on the outside, so you guys would have faith that whatever decision I made was going to be the right decision.
Yeah, that's wisdom right there. There's something to staying calm, both for how you're leaving an impression on those who are following you, who you're leading, and then also the clarity in your decision making, because your biggest mission as the commander was to be making sound, tactful decisions.
Yes.
So, well, daylight. What goes on after this? You're 8 days into this. You just expended a lot of ammo, a lot of food, a lot of energy, and the weather has not broken for you guys.
Well, the first thing we did was we got our recon patrols out in the morning, and basically I put you put 4 patrols out going the directions of north, south, east, west. And the way that I train my guys to do that is you go out about 200 meters, make a circle, come back 200 meters, different route, and you're looking for anything that might give you a hint of what the enemy has done or is doing. So you're either going to make contact as you go out there because they're close in. In this case, what we found was a lot of blood trails.
Okay.
And so the North Vietnamese were very good about dragging their dead off the battlefield because it was a psychological thing. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're in a heavy firefight and you don't find any dead on the battlefield, you're saying, "What? Did we do our job? Are all those guys still alive that we thought we killed?"
So it was more to mess with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to mess with us. But when you shoot somebody, it's amazing, and I know you know this, but I mean, you shoot somebody, they don't bleed a lot. Other people do. It depends on the location of the wound and the individual and how his circulatory system works. But in this case, we had a lot of blood trails, and that's a sign of either somebody being badly wounded or killed, and they drug them off the battlefield. So we knew that we had done some pretty good damage that day.
Yeah.
And so then the next question is, what do you do next? And so we're in the middle of monsoons. I knew we were in trouble weather-wise. And I had begun to think, if this happens, how do I get out of here? How do I get these guys back to safety without encountering at least one regiment and maybe more?
Right.
And we're down to probably less than 100 rounds per man.
Wow.
At this point. So I called my battalion commander late that night, the first night, and then in the morning. And he said, "Severn, I think the best thing for you, because I don't know what the weather's going to do, but the best thing to do is for you to get linked up with your other platoon." And I was kind of already thinking that way. And so after our patrols, got people fed, figured out how much ammo we had, still pouring down rain, so you got wind and rain and cold. And then I pulled everybody together because I didn't know where the enemy was, and I knew that there was a good chance in trying to get back down to the 1st platoon area that there was a good chance we were going to be hit, and it would probably be an ambush with a lot of soldiers, and a lot of us would probably be killed. So I wanted every man to know what the plan was and what we were going to do in order to try to egress this situation. So all the leaders, all grades of sergeants I had up there, and then I think I moved them out as best I could recollect at 8 o'clock. And we slipped and slid a very steep terrain. Mm-hmm. I mean, I distinctly remember a couple of soldiers falling and ricocheting off trees in the mud.
Yeah.
And it took us into darkness to get close to 1st Platoon. And I went another route. I think I wrote in the report on that I remembered Ranger training, never go back the same way you came.
Right.
So I picked a different route. And then it got dark again. And we were in really thick terrain as we got down toward this river that we had to cross. And now these streams have turned into rivers.
Full-blown rivers.
Yeah, full-blown rivers, muddy, really moving rapidly, dangerous, quite frankly. And so I said, and we weren't getting anywhere. And I pulled in all the flankers because I would have lost those guys if I didn't pull them in. So we were in file formation. I instructed everybody to one hand in front of the other, feel the other guy. We're going to move that way. And then finally, we were probably, I don't know, maybe 200 or 300 meters away from the river. And I just said, screw this. This is not good. We got to have a little bit of light to get through this wilderness here and through the wait-a-minute vines and that kind of thing. So I said, hey, Redlinski, if we call offset artillery by about 500 meters, are we going to get enough ambient light so we can at least see the wait-a-minute vines and hasten this situation? He said, well, sir, it's worth a try. Let's try it. So I said, yeah, let's try it. Call in 2 rounds. And so we went under the poncho again, red flashlight filter out, picked a target that was 500 meters away, called in his first round. It popped at about 1,000 feet off the deck and gave us a long-range ambient light, but we were able to see what was where, and that was enough to continue moving. So I said, Dave, how about continuing to call us in until I tell you to stop? And so we did that, but we were right in the gun target line. Mm. So each elimination round has a base plate. Yeah. And that base plate keeps going. Yeah. And we were right in the beaten zone of the base plate. So they were landing here and there, and I said, oh, this is not good.
And a base plate is, a 155, you have about that big piece of steel, about yay thick, and
Yes.
you can hear those suckers coming through the air. I will never forget that sound. The first time I heard an Illume mission, I thought we were getting shot at.
Well, I tell you what, I talked to, when we finally got out of this mess and got resupplied, I talked to each one of them. They said, "Sir, I thought I was going to get hit right in the forehead with one of those base plates. But
It'd be over quick.
It was worth the risk."
Yeah.
So I kept them coming.
So it wasn't giving away your position. It was just offset enough to see
Yes.
wait a minute vines, you called them? What were those?
Well, they're, when you get around a river in Vietnam, you literally have vines growing around trees. And I don't know if you've ever done a compass course at Fort Benning, Georgia, very similar. Yeah. And, going through ranger training, initial land navigation, man, we got caught up in those things all the time. Well, it was very similar, only probably enhanced.
Yeah.
In the rivers of Vietnam. In the daytime, you can figure out where those clusters are and where they aren't. Get around them at nighttime, you can't.
Yeah.
And so
they would just grab you and say, "Wait a minute."
you just get tangled up in them, or your weapons get tangled up in them, that kind of a thing. So anyway, that enabled us to get to the river. And then I saw the river had widened from the first time that we, several days before, had gone up the ridgeline. And so I said, I've always believed in you lead from the front. So I said, "Okay, boys, we're going to walk the scouts over to secure the far side, but I'm going with you." So we went out in the stream, and I think it was probably waist high and flowing like crazy. But I said, if we take it slow, we don't need to rig a bunch of ropes. And so got the scouts out across, secure the far side, and then I just put these guys in column, hung on to each other, made sure your weapon was secure. And we got everybody, a couple of trips. You had to reach for somebody and grab them before they went downriver. But we got across, and then I just led the unit, took an azimuth reading to the top of the mountain where I knew Sarah Nittman had moved to secure the LZ. And it was probably about a 650-foot climb up a mountain, slippery. And we linked up and expanded the perimeter and said, "Okay, boys, we're together." Sarah Nittman said, "Man, sir, am I glad to see you?" Kind of a thing.
How did you keep your map dry during all this? Because you didn't have those fancy waterproof maps.
Well, we put acetate over it.
Oh, okay.
I tried to do that every time. Sometimes we didn't have the chance, but mine was acetated.
Okay.
And so it was wet on the backside, but dry on the visual side. And it seemed to work pretty well.
Yeah, you lose that map out there. Doing all this without GPS is blowing my mind. But map and compass was the only way.
It's all compass and paces.
Yeah.
And guesses.
Keeping pace through that terrain, that would be hard too.
Yeah, but it was an estimate, quite frankly. We knew what our paces were on flat ground, and then you would estimate that, and then you'd have to, your paces are shorter on the mountain, so you'd kind of have to add a quarter to that, and that would give you a rough estimate. And then what I used to do is Radlitsky and I got together every night and pre-planned our targets for the next day. We had no nods, so we weren't operating very much at night, particularly in the monsoon weather. And so in the daytime, what I'd do is we'd call in rounds and be able to figure out where you were from where the rounds landed. Okay, we're on track, or we're 500 meters off, or 1,000 meters off, or where did that mountain come from? And that kind of thing. So,
So at this point, you've linked back up with 1st Platoon.
I did.
And now you're starting to talk about evac, but you guys are essentially combat ineffective. I'd imagine you're low on food, ammo, air support's not coming.
Yeah, we were. That morning, everybody ran through their last rations, because you have rations for 3 days. And, because of weight, you're not taking the full sea ration. You kind of figure out what you want for breakfast.
Yep.
So maybe it's crackers or a cinnamon roll, and some guys like the scrambled eggs, some guys didn't.
What was your favorite sea ration?
I think probably turkey loaf.
Turkey loaf. We didn't have that.
But then you'd figure out what you were going to eat for lunch, and maybe that was some crackers with some jam, and then figure out what your big meal of the day was going to be. And that's what you'd carry, and you'd bury the rest of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so as I recall from that morning, first thing I did was have a discussion with my battalion commander via radio, and it was a relay station. We lost commo that far back with our fire base, So there was a great group of special forces guys that ran a relay station along the main ridge line north-south. So we'd relay through them and to talk to the battalion commander. But anyway, he said, Ted, didn't use my full name, my first name, but he used a call sign. He said, because of the weather, we're socked in all of I Corps. You got to get to the sea on your own. We can't help you.
Just walking.
Just walking out.
Jeez.
So I said, okay, I've got 20 kilometers to go. I've got at least one regiment out there. I've got less than 100 rounds per man. We redistributed ammo when we linked up with the 1st Platoon. And so I probably pulled the 23rd Psalm out again and read it and said, oh, Lord, okay, keep me healthy mentally and physically so I can lead these great guys out of here. And so, I went under the poncho with my flashlight early in the morning, as I recall, before I got that call from the battalion commander. And I said, I think what I need to do is avoid the enemy.
Right.
Can't afford another firefight. No support. We're low on batteries. No food. 100 rounds per man. And the question is, how do I get those guys out of there? So I picked a route that was contoured the mountains. It hit a couple of key passes on the way out. And then I said, well, I think maybe if I go about, go for a couple hours and then move up the side of a mountain and just sit and listen and wait, send scouts out, that's the best way to do it. That'll give me a feel for who's following us, if anybody. We can watch the enemy move if we're quiet for that time that I decide to set up there. So that's what we began to do after the battalion command. And I gave everybody, I remember pulling all the leaders together this time, not all the sergeants, but the K leaders, squad leaders, platoon sergeants. And I said, okay, boys, here's our situation. We got to get out of here by ourselves. Nobody's going to help us. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to move for 2 hours, and then I'm going to designate a place offset that is going to be a place where we're just going to form a perimeter and listen, send our scouts out in either direction. So we did that the first day. We did it the second day. And then I think the third day is when we came down a huge ridge line. And I knew there was a river there. And I suspected there was an enemy trail on the far side of the river. And so I stopped about 100 with the company, about 100 meters off, and took 2 scouts down there with me. And I waded out in the river, waded across the creek, and there had been hundreds of enemy. There was a huge trail on the other side. So I pulled one scout, went back to the company with me, left a scout there to watch the trail. Came back and put a machine gun up on at the end of the day. I said the best time to cross is when those guys aren't going to be moving. So just before dark, I think, is the best time. So we waited in the jungle until that time, put a machine gun up left and right on the trail. And their mission was obviously early warning and to kill anybody, bad guys who were coming down the trail. I talked to the platoon leaders and we worked audibles in case that happened, and where would we go? How would we fire maneuver? So we worked that out. And I said, all I want to do is get across the river and up about 100 yards into the next ridge line. And that's where we're going to hold tight for the night. So we did that. We were able to do that. We pulled that off, tucked up all the machine gun teams behind us. And then that's where we spent the night. But I had stand to every morning, and I had mentioned this at this point in time. So I had everybody up at about half an hour before sunlight. So 4:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning, as best I remember. And the 1st platoon was closest to the trail, and they heard large movement in the morning. So I said, okay, let's pull all our claymores and trip flares in, get ready to roll. And Dave Redlinski and I had plotted targets along the trail up and down this creek. So I said, Dave, as soon as you can get the fire mission together, let's just blast that trail full of artillery, and we're going to move out at the same time. So you're going to have to keep your radio up so you can continue to adjust or talk to the artillery guys back in the fire base. So that's what we did. Wow. So to this day, I don't know how many we killed or wounded, but it worked. And then we got up the next mountain, and I had talked to the battalion commander, I think the day before, and I said, this is a really key pass. It's the main ridge line going north and south. If you can have a rifle company up there to secure that pass, because I think we're going to be followed by bad guys. And so he did that with my good friend Terry Mills, company commander of B Company. So Terry called me up when he had it secured that pass at about 2 o'clock, 1400 in the afternoon. And we exchanged information for passage of lines. And so it took me the better part of that third day to reach Terry. And, I ran into bed. I can still see him to this day, sitting with his rifle crooked in his right arm as if he was Davy Crockett. He said, "Hey, Severn, what took you so long?"
Yeah, right.
Did you get lost? It was just good to see him.
Jeez.
So, and they had carried up 1 C ration per man for us, another couple hundred rounds for each one of my soldiers. So we exchanged all that, got weapons clean, expanded the perimeter. Terry and I had a lot of conversation that night on what had just happened and what we're about ready to go through. And we called up battalion commander, and he said, "Okay, boys, if you have no contact tonight, move down the ridge line. Let me know when you're about an hour out from the first possible LZ, when you break out of the jungle. And we're going to pick you up either by truck or Chinook, depending on what we can fly or whether we can fly or not." And so it was, the monsoon heavy rain stopped at that time, but it was still sprinkling and a heavy fog, as I recall, in that last ridge line. So everything worked as planned. We were 50% alert through the night. And then and early in the morning, Terry was first in the order of march. So he rucked up and moved out with Delta Company at first light, or with Bravo Company. I was right behind him, and we worked our way down into the lowlands of Fulak, this village I mentioned previously. And as we broke out of the fog, probably about, maybe 500 feet above the lowlands, I said, "Terry, we can fly. Let's let Yoder know." And so we got down to the LZ. Terry got down there first. We secured the LZ. 3 Chinooks came in and picked up Terry and his company. And then the next 3 picked up me, and I was the last guy off the battlefield. That's tradition for the commander to be the first on and the last off.
Yep.
And off we went, flew up to Camp Eagle. There we had a full support resupply of ammunition, food, grenades, whatever we needed. But lined up were 22 helicopters and 2 Cobras waiting to take us on our next mission.
Really? Just
so
that
we had
fast?
A hot meal, change of clothes, resupply. I remember a quarter ton picked me up, took me down to the battalion headquarters, said, "Severn, here's where you're going this afternoon at 1500. Good luck." And so then I go back and brief my commanders, and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're off on another combat assault.
I would like to take a brief moment to thank one of our sponsors, USAA. USAA is celebrating over 100 years of service to our military community. It all started in 1922 when a group of soldiers insured each other's vehicles when no one else would. With USAA's launch of Face the Fight Coalition to counter veteran suicide, we're elated to have them as a sponsor of the Vantage Point. If you're a veteran, active duty, or a family member of someone who has served, check out USAA.com to see how they can help you today.
During this 20-kilometer movement, was there a moment when fear started to take over and you started to lose your calm a little bit? I'd imagine coming across that large enemy force that you dropped artillery on was pretty nerve-provoking.
The good Lord gave me a calm. So when the situations are happening, I'm calm. I might think about them, and you get after the fact, you're thinking, what just happened? And you might get a little internally excited. For example, I'll tell you a story. So there was another time, this was months thereafter, that we were on another mission, and it happened on Easter. And so I was required, I thought it was just a stupid requirement, that I had to fly every squad back for Easter services, and we were north of Camp Eagle this time, right along the ridgeline. And so I had to fly every squad back, 2 helicopters per squad. It took all day to Camp Eagle to do an Easter service. I'm not sure why they didn't send a chaplain out so we could do everybody at one time. But anyway, so I was waiting for the last squad, and I kept my CP group in one squad on an abandoned fire base. And so the sun was starting to set over what we used to call Rocket Ridge, which is where the enemy used to shoot all our base camps from with 122 millimeter rockets. And I was I made everybody dig foxholes, so if something happened, we had a fighting position. So I left my rifle and my web gear and my rucksack back in the foxhole, and I had made myself a cup of coffee, so I had a sea ration can and a cup of coffee, and I was out enjoying the sunrise. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose from this ridge line that's about 200 yards away. And I mean, there were probably 2 machine guns, 5 RPGs that went whizzing right by me. And I said, and I'm the only guy standing up.
Wow.
One of the dumbest things I've ever done in my life. But you talk about being complacent. I got complacent that day. And so I hit the deck. I think I did the fastest low crawl back, went ass end over TCAL into my foxhole. And then we began to return fire, and call in artillery. I think I called a couple of Cobra gunships because a pretty heavy volume of fire coming. And then I get everybody up on line, and we charged the position.
Wow. And
moved the enemy off the position. But as soon as I got up, I was so full of adrenaline. So, in those days we had, and I'd assume the M4s are the same. You got safe, and then you've got single shot, and you've got full automatic. So I accidentally, with my thumb, there was a round that went off, I guess, and went whizzing by me after we thought it was calm, and I ducked. And at the same time, I hit the full automatic selector switch, and when I ducked, I pulled the trigger finger. So I pumped about 7 rounds right next to my right foot.
Oh, man.
I looked around to see if anybody had seen the company commander do that, and they hadn't, fortunately. I always thought that was one of the dumbest things I had ever done.
Man, how funny. When you're pumped full of adrenaline like that, things happen. Firefights are...
Yeah, it's just honest.
Yeah.
But I don't think... Some of my troops will probably hear this, but I never told them that.
Yeah.
And nobody ever saw it.
Yeah.
So that's
and
good.
your foot's in one piece.
Yeah. Foot's in one piece.
Thank God. Man. Well, what a story. I mean, that mission itself just says so much about you and Delta Company. What mission that started out as a seek and destroy mission. We're going to find these hospitals. We're going to find these command centers, turned into a hide and run kind of mission almost. But I think a salient part is that you guys were still killing bad guys on the way out. You were dropping artillery on them as you were moving, which speaks volume about your guys' persistence in accomplishing the mission. Yeah, the interesting thing is it's been a mystery to my troops. Sir, why did we make that long walk out? There were times they thought I was absolutely crazy because they said, sir, there's a perfectly good trail down there. And I had them contouring, mountain ranges or ridge lines. And but I think after I explained it to them, they understood. Yeah. If you would have taken those trails, what could have happened? I told you I was an EOD technician. You never walk down trails. No, you're ripe for a mine. Yeah. Or you're ripe for an ambush. And so these guys, I mean, you could kind of predict where they might be, and they'd had years, even back in the French and Indochina War, where they would build these massive bunker complexes on the end of ridge lines. So, as I was looking at the map, I said, well, we're going to find enemy there or here. I mean, you could predict that, and the trail networks would run into that. And they always had what we called 1 or 2 trail watchers out running the trails looking for Americans who were trying to venture into their area of operations. So all I tried to do is figure out where those pieces would be and steer my guys away from it, to include contouring above where some of those positions may have been. Mm-hmm. Smart, as far as I'm concerned. And you probably saved a lot of lives. So what was crazy then, those people who were saying it was crazy are alive because of it, I would say. There was a good chance of that. Yeah. Well, how was returning home after these deployments back then? Adjusting back into the civilian world, integrating with the family again? I would say
I don't. That's a good question, but one of the things that I did at Fort Carson here was I've in my lifetime I've been air assault, airborne, light, heavy. And one of the things that I did in my life was I was on the Bradley development team. And so one of the things I was asked to do after I came back from the Middle East in 2005 was to start up an operation at Fort Carson to field Bradleys to the 4th Infantry Division, the 1st Infantry Division, and a lot of National Guard units in the West. And so I watched 4 deployments of every brigade, every heavy brigade here at Fort Carson. They all used to be heavy at one time. We only have one right now, and I think that's going away to a striker outfit who are coming up soon. So I watched this cycle of, you get back from one deployment, you have 30 days leave, and then the next 30 days are spent getting back connexes and new people and old people exchanging, and then you're training right up for your next mission. And the 10th Special Forces Group guys are going every 6 months. Rotations, and so you're never really relaxed. Probably during the 30-day leave, maybe, and then you're training up, and you know that every time you deploy, the chances of you getting hurt or killed are pretty good. So you're dealing with that, I think, as a soldier and a leader. And you're also dealing with a community who, I've been to a lot of places in my lifetime in the soldiering business, and I think that the Colorado Springs community is probably the best community I've seen for having empathy for a soldier and trying to help the soldier in one form or another. Although there are a lot of people that haven't served, so they don't have a clue. So I think one of the toughest things is while you have all this going on in your mind, I'm going to go back, you're trying to adjust to your family, if you're married, your kids, because you've been away, in this case, for you guys, 12 to 13 months. Mm-hmm. You're looking at a community who doesn't have a clue where you've been or what you've done or how you've lived your lives or the risks that are out there. And that, I think that's the toughest thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the question you asked. And
yeah.
I mean, that was tough in my day. I think it's tough every time you send soldiers off to war, sailors, airmen, Marines. The adjustment back to a community who does not know what you've gone through is a hard thing. People are going to the movies and they're playing golf and they're going skiing. And
yeah.
I mean, they mean well, but they don't have a clue.
Right.
And I think that's a tough thing to adjust to. And adjusting back to families and wives and who does what to whom and what's your mission and what's my mission within the family. And I know you've had it for a year, but I want to come back and take some of that on. And those are the tough things, don't you think?
For sure. I think in modern day, I noticed the stressors and worries that people have that are really, weighing them down, whether it's a career or, I mean, if we're getting critical here, like how many likes we have on social media or, different reputations that you carry in the digital world. And if you just, I think back to times in Afghanistan, I was in Ukraine a couple times, it could just be so much worse, and I'd imagine you felt a lot of the same thing. You come home from Vietnam and all of a sudden, you see 2 people arguing about a parking spot at the grocery store and you're just like, it could be so much worse. Things could be so much worse. You have no idea.
Yeah, you have no idea.
No idea.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a couple of things that happened to me. These are kind of simple, and so here I am, a young captain coming back. So we landed in Seattle, Washington, and I just never forget the cool air coming through the airplane when the doors are open.
Yeah.
We're back in the USA.
I love that feeling.
Just great. And then we were offloaded, and I think an NCO from the welcome operation came out, formed us all up, loaded on buses, went and had to go through security first, make sure we weren't carrying anything back that we shouldn't be carrying back.
War trophies.
Yeah, war trophies or whatever else it was. And then it was kind of a triage. Those guys who were leaving the service went one way. Those guys who were staying went another. But most everybody was going home for some leave. And so in my case, I had to get on a bus. So I came back in jungle fatigues. You're supposed to be in greens. We didn't have enough time. But from the time that we were notified the airplane was there till the time of contract airplane, so we just carried our greens. And then I had to get on a bus to go down to the Seattle airport. My dad was still active at that time. So he was the vice commander of a B-52 wing down in March Air Force Base, Southern California. And that's where my wife, Dusty, and my son, Ted, stayed. And Ted was born just before I left. And so he was probably, 14 months at that time, perhaps. So I go down to the Seattle airport. I'm in my jungle fatigues, hot off of Vietnam. And I went up to the ticket counter to buy a ticket home. And I got my ass chewed by this lady who was the ticket counter. Well, you're not supposed to be in jungle fatigues. Man. You're supposed to be in. I was so dead gum angry. It was all I could do, even though she was a woman, not to come across the counter at her. So I said, yes, ma'am. And so I took my gear, my uniform down, found the nearest men's room, which was really busy, changed in the men's room. And I'm thinking, okay, if that lady is treating a captain like this, well, how's she treating privates and sergeants? And she probably didn't know a sergeant from a private,
no,
or a captain from a sergeant, or whatever it is. And so fortunately, they changed duty. So there was another person there, and I didn't have to encounter. But that's the first encounter. It was anti-military at that time.
Man.
And and I got to tell you, she didn't just talk to me about that. She screamed it.
Really?
You could hear, 25 yards in each direction. I mean, it just really frosted me.
Man.
So then the second time was, so I was assigned ROTC duty. I was still recovering from a leg wound. And so I reported, drove into the building to report into the ROTC detachment. And the students were arriving at the same time. So this was probably late August, 1970. And a bunch of kids and dorms right next door dropped out strings of firecrackers. I got to tell you, I was on the deck.
I'm sure.
Trying to find a curb. And then it dawned on me, well, these are firecrackers. You're not in. So your instinct that you've had that's probably kept you alive all these months, it's still there. You're not out of. I mean, I'm less than a week away from coming out of Vietnam. And so I said, oh, man, I probably have some adjustment to do here. And then probably about 4 days later, they had a ceremony to open the school. That means all the faculty, the students are already sitting in an auditorium, commencement ceremony, and all the faculty's lined up according to their academic ranking. So I'm a 24-year-old phys ed major, no master's degree, and I'm an assistant professor of military science, which authorized me to be about halfway up the line. So there was a guy great guy, Dr. Chalmers Davidson, who was the professor lead in the history department. He was responsible for the event that day. And so Mr. Davidson comes up to me, Dr. Davidson, he says, Captain Severn, here's where I want you to be. And I didn't want to go to ROTC. I wanted to go back to the 82nd Airborne Division and back to Vietnam. That's where I thought, you kind of alluded to that. That's where I thought my deal was.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of dragging my heels a little bit because I'm there, but I want to do what we need to do. And so he put me in line in front of an assistant professor, I think, from the psychology department. And I was trying to get to know people around me, and I was in uniform. I was in TWs there. And so we had all our awards and decorations and Range Average and CIB and airborne wings, that kind of thing. So you stood out as an Army ROTC instructor. So this lady, after Davidson leaves, taps me on the shoulder and says, "Are you Captain?" "Yes, ma'am." "Why are you standing in front of me?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean, ma'am? This is where Dr. Davidson." "Yes, but I'm about ready to get my PhD. You, the baby killer, need to be at the back of the line." She didn't say that exactly, but that was the intimation. I said, "Ma'am, I don't really give a crap where I use this language. I don't give a crap where I stand. I'm going to go to the back of the line. So I went back to the back of the line, and I was very happy back there. And Dr. Davidson comes along and he said, Captain Severn, what are you doing back here? I said, well, I had a little bit of an encounter with the woman that you put me in front of. He said, you come with me. And so he drugged me back up there. And this is where Captain Severn goes. Do you understand that? And so I sat next to her the whole time and probably didn't win any friends that day. But
Man.
I mean, so there's 3 incidents
Right back to
of
back.
trying to adjust from the battlefield back home. And I know that generations past my generation over the last 20 years have been warmly welcomed, and yet there's an adjustment that has to take place.
Yeah, there's still an adjustment. However, I think treatment of veterans these days is definitely a lot better.
I do too.
Yeah, especially, I mean, there's so many veteran organizations. The VA is in a completely different position. The insurance, everything's there for veterans nowadays. So
yeah, and I think because of the way the Vietnam veterans were welcomed home, I think that America said, "Ooh, that's not the right thing to do." Those poor guys are going where they're asked to go.
Right.
It's not necessarily they want to go there,
right.
but they've signed up to protect the country, and that's where the country thinks they ought to be, and so that's where they go. I think the country's recognized that,
Yeah.
and it's a good thing.
You mentioned your wife and son, and if you wouldn't mind just getting a little personal, how important has family and a good partner been through all of this military service?
Very important is what I would say. First of all, the son, my oldest son is still in the Army, and he's serving up in Washington right now with the intelligence community. But I remember meeting him the first time when I got home. So here's this little guy. He doesn't know me, and I don't know him. And I said, Ted, let's go take a walk. And he grabbed my index finger, and off we went, tried to even look at me, and I'd look down at him, just trying to get to know each other. And so I think that's a challenge for every soldier, whether they be male or female, coming home to their family. My wife Dusty has been so supportive because most of the time I've been with troops in my time in the Army, almost 29 years. So I've commanded a couple rifle companies. I've been Battalion XO, Brigade XO, Battalion Commander, Brigade Commander, Garrison Commander at Carson, Chief of Staff of CTAF, where we put the first troops on the ground in 1995. She has been with me throughout that whole time. And God bless her for making the adjustments as I come back from wherever. She's just been fantastic at that. But that's not an easy process, as you know.
No, it's not. Yeah, I was told you guys were quite the power couple and to ask about her. But yeah, I'd imagine that support while you're pursuing all of this, you probably couldn't have done it without her.
True. Yeah. And we raised a fairly normal family of 5.
Yeah. 5, wow.
But then again, I think, what I would say is I think faith is a big part of that.
Well, a question I want to ask you, because chances are there will never be another war fought like Vietnam was fought. What lessons did you guys learn then that you think future generations could take from it and kind of advance forward with those lessons learned?
I think what I've learned as a infantry leader my whole life, I would say first thing I learned, and I think I really began to learn this in Ranger training. You can really tap into the American soldier, and that American soldier, be it male or female, can be pushed harder than they think they can. That Bach Ma operation, I pushed those guys hard. I had them moving for 4 days to get out of there. I know that they were tired, they were cold, they were miserable. They thought that I was probably crazy, but they did it. And they all got out of there alive. So I'd say that's number one. Without being mean, a commander can push people harder based on the situation. They can do much more than they think they can.
Yeah.
The American soldier.
You could push yourself harder than you think you can, I think.
Absolutely.
Even outside of the military, not even as a soldier. I think
That's exactly right.
Nowadays we're very comfortable in our ways here in America, but I think in general we can always do probably, tenfold more than we put ourselves out there on a day-to-day
I
basis.
agree with that. And there is practical application
For sure.
to the life out of the service to that.
Yeah. Business
I
application,
agree with that.
relationships, everything.
So from the second piece, soldier piece, is that I think the better trained you are before you deploy, the more success you're going to have on the battlefield and the better chance of coming home alive. So I think the way we're doing it these days is certainly a lot better, and the way that I did it in later years is a lot better than I did it as part of the Army, is a lot better than the way this individual replacement. I mean, I think you very quickly become a part of the unit if you do it individual replacement, but it works a heck of a lot better if you've worked together beforehand and you know each other's strengths and weaknesses and who you can tap to do what, and you're well schooled and well coordinated on your tactics, techniques, and procedures ahead of time, so that and I mean that involves a lot of realistic training. Mm-hmm. So you kind of react under fire rotely as opposed to having to think your way through it. So that's number two. Thirdly, I would think that I guess my experience on the battlefield is the guy who knows how to employ his weapons the best. And there's a tactical application to that too. So it's tactics and weapons. The people who understand that the best, the soldiers, the leaders who understand that the best, are the guys who are going to come out firstest with the mostest, if you will. And then I just think this interpersonal piece that you and I talked about from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I think it happens better in the military society than it does in the civilian society these days. We're still forced to interact with one another as you're setting up a perimeter, part of a tank team or a tank crew or a Bradley crew or a mortar crew or an infantry squad or platoon. The more you interface and know the other guy, the more you're going to want to, as a team member, protect that valuable team. And I think that's very important. It still is applicable to today. That hasn't changed.
Yeah, absolutely. What things do you have going on these days? I know you're the lead of the Pikes Peak Range Riders. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I guess the short answer would be that I'm president of the Pikes Peak Ranger Foundation. That's a busy, 48 out of 52 weekends a year. We've got youth activities going on at our 45-acre equestrian center.
Wow.
Called Latigo. I'm a lead docent at the World War II Aviation Museum, the National Museum. So I let an Army guy do that because I've had a certain amount of experience with flying in airplanes.
Well, your father was aviation, so.
Yeah. And then I'm an usher at a church, and then I try to travel a little bit with my wife and see family. And so the combination of those things keep me pretty busy.
Keeps you busy. That's good. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Ted. This is a great story. I always get, goosebumps sharing a Vietnam veteran story, because I was telling you, my father's a Vietnam veteran, and just hearing about your guys' generation and the discipline and the work ethic and the struggle you guys went through during that time. I mean, it needs to be documented, and we need to be learning from, the things you guys endured during that war. So, like I said, I appreciate you coming on and sharing.
Well, I got to tell you, there are a lot of great Vietnam veterans out there. So for you guys to invite me in here, I kind of feel like I'm representing those guys. So I hope I've done it right. Yeah. It's an honor to be able to talk about it a little bit, and some of the lessons we learned and how they apply to today's soldier and returning and all those kind of things. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah. If I could close with one little bit of advice, I think of you, you're kind of like a man's man. Like, you were like battle hardened in Vietnam, and you've kind of held that character throughout your entire life. And now it's become this, form of wisdom. I feel like nowadays, a younger man doesn't have that same quality. It's maybe lost in video games or a screen or something like that. But what piece of advice would you give to a younger man, maybe late teens, early mid-20s, that's just struggling to feel that confidence, that masculinity to lead and make decisions and pursue a career and goals? What advice would you give to him?
I think you have to get away from modernity a lot. Stay fit. I think there are five, what I call the 5 F's. I think they're very important: faith, family, friends, fitness, mentally and intellectually, and then fire, something that you are anxious to get out of bed for every day.
A passion.
I think that's important. That starts when you're a young man. I was always an adventurer, so I was outside all the time. I enjoyed sports, didn't watch a lot of TV, loved camping, hiking, water skiing, snow skiing, anything that had to do with outdoors. My advice would be get away from the machines. They're a tremendous advantage these days. The iPhone is a tremendous. You can find anything out in a second, or with a computer, but you're not interfacing with people doing that, unless it's by text, and that's not eyeball to eyeball. That's not really getting to know people. You're not exercising your body if you're not playing sports or out hiking or doing something. So you become a couch potato.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem if you're going to be a soldier or an airman or a seaman or whatever. So mark those times when you need to be on your iPhone or your computer, but get out and enjoy life and see the country, see the nation, see the world, study, read. I just heard a news report today, for example,
I'm scared for this one.
that said that less than 50% of our youngsters read these days a book. They read excerpts, or they read something, quick information, a paragraph off an iPhone when you tap in some kind of a subject. Books are great. Learn about the world. Take it in. Don't live in an artificial environment on your computer and your iPhone.
Yeah.
That would be my advice.
So even if you've watched this whole 2-hour episode on a screen, you need to go out into nature after it and
Absolutely.
make up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
and harden yourself a little bit for toughness. I've watched this whole business of having to have a safe spot. I say, what in the world is that all about?
Right.
If you got a problem, hit it head on. Don't hide from it.
Yeah.
If somebody's got a different view of things than you do, talk to them. Find out why they think what they think. Argue with them a little bit. Have good, positive communications. I don't know. I could talk on that for half an hour.
I would love to get into that. We could take this out downtown if you want to go grab some drinks. I think she runs, but the brakes are bad, like I said. But yeah. Well, Ted, like I said, I appreciate you coming on. This has been a remarkable conversation. I'm excited to put it out there for the world to see, and we'll be in touch.
You've done a great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted.